Happy to be doing a series on major events in culture and in politics because we're not dealing with a major election year. And as our first guest, we are going to be speaking to the incomparable Marti Cummings, who identifies as non-binary and uses they, them pronouns. So without further ado, give a big round of applause to Marti.
Hi, thank you, Chris, for having me. I'm so honored to be here with all of you. And this nice view in this gorgeous building. So happy New Year.
Thank you. So first, tell us a little bit about drag as an art form. What is drag? Who can participate in drag? And what do you do as a drag artist?
Sure, so I'm a drag queen for a living. Not today, though it's my day off, so I don't want to put it on, it takes a lot of work. So drag is an art form. How do you explain drag? Drag for me is an art form where you can express yourself in a wide variety of ways. I love doing drag because one day I can be doing a show that's all show tunes, and the next day I can do a punk rock show and just really switch up my interest as a performer day to day. But there's a history of drag that a lot of people don't know about. We see drag in nightlife settings or on TV, but the first known drag artist in America was William Dorsey Swann, who in the 1800s was born into slavery. And after they were enslaved, they started throwing, in the 1800s, mind you, when it was illegal to be black, it was illegal to be gay or queer, it was illegal to wear clothing that wasn't your assigned gender at birth, and they would hold these underground speakeasies for people to be able to express themselves. And then we all know the story, or some folks might know the story of Harvey Milk, who was the first openly gay person to win office in America. But the first openly LGBTQ person to run for office in America was in 1961, Jose Sarria, and they were a drag queen. So drag has a really interesting history. It's not only being a form of entertainment, but intersectionally linked with political action and activism, which I think is really an awesome tidbit of drag that a lot of people don't know about.
And that's a nice segue to the political aspect. You were recently invited by the President and the First Lady to attend the signing of the Respect for Marriage Act in DC because of your contributions as a drag artist and LGBTQ activist. Tell us what that was like when you received that invitation from the President.
I now have my invite framed in my living room. It was very exciting to get an invite from the President and Dr. Biden. I took some napkins with the presidential seal. I framed those also. It was a really beautiful moment in our nation's history. It was kind of twofold though, you know, like we were given the right to equal marriage with the Supreme Court several years ago, and then the Senate had to go and do some action because of how our Supreme Court is now structured. We had to add some extra layers of protection there, but I was really honored to be invited. You know, as somebody who does drag, I never thought I would be invited by the President to the White House. But with that, you know, we're living in a really interesting time in our country where so many rights for various groups of people have been won over the years, and we're seeing them chipped away again. And so there was a lot of backlash being a drag artist invited, and Tucker Carlson did a wonderful story about me on Fox News, which was traumatic. But I'm a big believer in as much hate as thrown my way or in the way of equality, you know, that's just fuel to continue to keep pushing forward, you know? Like, rights aren't won by sitting at home pouting, they're won by taking action. And I've had a really interesting drag career. You know, I went to the White House. I was the first drag queen to be invited by the United Nations to speak and give a lecture, and that was incredibly overwhelming to be in full drag at the UN, walking past some dignitaries who probably would have wanted to imprison me in their country for doing what I was doing, but I was like, you can't do it here. But that was really awesome. And then I got invited a second time to the United Nations to moderate a panel. So I've had a really unique experience as a drag artist, which I'm really proud of.
And if I'm not mistaken, we ran for office at the same time, and I
We did.
believe you were the first drag performer to run for public office in New York City. Is that true?
In New York City, yeah. So Chris and I both ran for city council in the 2021 cycle, and I know you opened with this isn't a major election year, but it's 2023, and there is a city council election again this year. So get ready to vote again. There's like an election every year in New York. So I was the first openly non-binary candidate for city office in New York and the first drag artist to run for office, and with ranked choice voting, which is I think, I don't know your opinions on ranked choice voting, I think it's great. But with ranked choice voting, our campaign came in second place for #1 votes on election night, which was really awesome. And I think it's so interesting how media kind of frames things, you know, after an election. I'm sure you experience this in yours. They always do the articles of like who won and what were the races, and they always say, and the failed campaigns were. And I was like, our campaign wasn't a failure at all. We might not have won, which of course is the goal, but it wasn't a failure by any means. We were able to connect with thousands of voters about issues that impacted them, especially in the time of COVID, where people were out of work, facing discrepancies from their landlords, or not having access to proper medical care, or wages. And as a gig worker, that's something that I certainly have experienced. But the big wins on our campaign were there's a couple specific moments that really highlighted why representation matters. Whether you win or lose an election, representation is so important on so many levels. We had a lot of our campaign events were done over Zoom when the pandemic hit, and so we had people from all over the country volunteering for us. And this one person who volunteered for every single phone bank we did, sent me a message on Zoom asking if they could have my phone number. And as a candidate, I don't normally give out my personal number, but I said, yeah, of course you can have my number. And this kid called me. I think they had just turned 18 or something. And they lived in Massachusetts, and they said that they had come out as transgendered, and their parent, when they were like 16 or 17, and their parents sent them to conversion therapy, which is a horribly dangerous practice. And they were now in a wellness facility to kind of undo the trauma of conversion therapy. And they said that they read a news article about our campaign, and it was the first time they ever saw themselves represented in politics. And they said that they were planning their suicide. And then they saw our campaign and started volunteering, and didn't plan their suicide anymore. And that was like such a win for our campaign. And then my mom, who is like the sweetest, crazy person ever, was on the street on election day. And I do remember it was like downpouring on election day. It's like pouring rain, and my sweet mom is out there like in the rain handing out flyers. And this woman came up to my mom and said, I just want to tell you I'm on my way to vote. My mom had like stopped them and was like, vote for my kid. And this mom was like, I just want to tell you we're on the way to vote for them because a couple weeks ago, Marti took the time to speak to us on the street for 15 minutes, which I don't know if you run into candidates on the street, but nobody talks to you for 15 minutes or like, take my flyer and vote for me. But I think it's important to connect with people. But this mom told my mom that night at dinner, their middle schooler came out to them and said that they had never met a LGBTQ person before, and they had seen it on TV but never met one, and meeting me and hearing about our campaign inspired them to do so. And so that to me is a win, and I'm so proud that our campaign was able to to do that.
And I can speak from my experience running for office. There were a number of kids that volunteered for me that would specifically cite you as an inspiration, who were trans, non-binary identities, and kids who just didn't feel safe in their environments, and said, Marti made me feel safe. They're always very happy to hear that we were friends with each other. And that it really changed a lot of people's lives. And I think that's something people often don't realize about candidacies for office, is that winning is part of it, but another part of it is giving voice to people who don't traditionally have that.
Yeah, we get so, sorry to cut you off. We get so wrapped up in like the ugliness of politics, which there is so much ugliness in politics. But we get so wrapped up in it that we forget these moments of goodness that can happen because of politics. So I'm a big believer that we need real people running to represent people, because you're representing real people, so we need those voices at the
And now we're going to talk about the ugliness of politics a bit.
I can't wait! Oh.
Yes. So one of the reasons we were so interested in talking to you is that because you're a drag artist, as you know, around the country, there's a full frontal assault on drag artists specifically, especially drag artists that perform reading and literature events for children at local libraries. Some states are trying to pass laws against it. A lot of it is being fueled by far-right media, the same media that has personally attacked you. So tell everyone a bit about the risks that are being faced nationwide around drag artists and LGBT identity and why that's happening right now.
Well, I think I'm like, are there any far-right people here? I think when you run out of things to run on, you go on the attack, the easy, low-hanging fruit attacks. And we know what's happening with gun violence in this country, what's happening with reproductive justice, what's happening on so many different issues. So the far right is using old tropes, Anita Bryant tropes, she's come and gone. Those days are gone. And they're using these old tropes, calling LGBTQ people groomers and pedophiles, and these really damaging, defamatory, dangerous words as scare tactics. When Drag Story Hour, I'm on the board of Drag Story Hour in New York, and it's an incredible opportunity, in my opinion, to help educate, not just read a book to a kid, but educate them on acceptance and tolerance and embracing people's differences. I think every single kid at one point or another feels like they might have been picked on or bullied for one thing or another, or feels like they don't fit in for whatever reason. So, we've all been children before. I'm sure we felt that way when we were kids, and sometimes as adults too, right? So Drag Story Hour is just a fun opportunity to help give kids an opportunity to just feel seen and accepted and to teach love. And I've done so many of these events at schools and libraries, and the kids don't give a flip if you're in drag or not. They just are excited you have a shiny costume on and that you're reading a book about a unicorn. That's what they care about. And I take it very personally when, not to get too deep or whatever, but when,
Please do.
So when Tucker Carlson we all know Tucker Carlson, right? Not a very nice man. And so he did this whole, after the White House, he did this whole story on Fox News, where he openly, in front of millions of viewers, called me a pedophile. First of all, that's not true, and it's defamatory, and it's slander, but on a personal level, as somebody who did experience sexual assault as a child, it's extremely traumatizing to then have that word used against me. And I'm somebody, I ran for office, people have said a lot of things about me, but what about a drag artist or a person or a queer person who's never experienced that type of vitriol? And then they're having people show up to their show or show up to their story time or in their DMs telling them they should kill themselves, or that they're gonna have somebody show up at their home and kill them, which is messages that I've received, If you're not someone in the public eye like me, you might not be able to handle that. It's really traumatizing. So I think these attacks are damaging on more levels than just legislatively. They're dangerous. In this, what month are we in? We're still in January. Oh, we're still in January. I was like, what month are we in? Because I was thinking of the statistic. In this year alone, we're not even through the first month of the year. Over 100 pieces of anti-LGBTQ legislation have been introduced in 22 different states across the country, primarily targeting young people, kids. So not just legislatively is it damaging, but on a personal level, it's really damaging for our community.
That's something I want to talk more about because, as we know, a lot of these laws are blatantly unconstitutional. They'll be shot down in court, most of them.
Hopefully.
But that doesn't change what's happening to the people, the kids, and the youth that are seeing these laws go forward, and they don't see any future for themselves and what that does to a person's mental health. And I want you to talk about mental health because you've been super open about it, about your mental health journey, things that have happened to you, and I think it's so important that we get stories from queer people out about the real effects this has on a human being, to hear themselves lied about in this way, to feel that hatred, especially for children. So talk to us a little bit about your mental health journey, what you've learned.
Well, I think there's so much stigma around mental health still, and there shouldn't be. Your brain is an organ in your body, right? So if something's wrong with your heart or your lungs or you break your arm or whatever, what do? You go to the doctor and you see what's wrong and you get it fixed and you take the next right action. But so often when we're talking about issues of mental health, there's so much shame around it when there shouldn't be. It's the same thing. Sometimes it just needs a little tune-up, And there should be no shame in that. And with my own mental health journey, I for a long time felt nervous to talk about it because I do have a public platform, and I was nervous, are people gonna judge me if I talk about this or whatever? And then I started hearing stories like what we talked about from the campaign, and I was diagnosed with bipolar 2 disorder, and I felt a lot of shame around that when I was diagnosed. And then I was like, okay, so what? So I'll take a pill and talk to my therapist, and it's something I was born. You can't help what your genetics are.
What is the cultural, the culture impacts, how does it influence you when you have, all of this extra pressure due to your identity? That would be a lot for all of us, even as adults. How do you think that's impacting kids who are already struggling? I
always joke, I'm a drag queen who has bipolar disorder, I have anxiety and depression, I have been sober for 12 years because I'm an alcoholic. I'm like, God, what else are you gonna put on my plate? Okay, what other things am I gonna have to deal with? But all of those things make me who I am. And as difficult as they can be at times, those are things that have shaped me to be the 35-year-old person I am today. And hopefully when I'm 40, I'll know more about myself so I can grow. And at 50, I'll know more about myself. And so I think discussing these issues publicly is important because there's so many people who might feel ashamed to talk about these things. And when young kids talk about, we've seen statistically since Trump was in office, bullying in schools has gone up 700%. Since Elon Musk took over Twitter, we've seen the use of the N-word, the use of the F-word, anti-Semitic language on Twitter has risen 9,000%. That's insane. He hasn't been in charge of Twitter that long, and already people have unleashed this. And so when you have people who there's so many, our Jewish community, our Islamic community, women, queer people, black and brown people, and immigrants, and AAPI people are now being hit so hard with racism and misogyny and anti-Semitism and all of these things. And that does put a weight on your mental health. And especially if you're a kid and that's what you're seeing on TikTok or Instagram or Twitter or TV or whatever, and that's what's being fed to you, it holds a weight. And so I talk very openly. Not too long, it was last year, but I think I have a pretty good life and things are great or whatever, but my medication got a little messed up and I tried to end my life, and I'm happy that I'm in a much better place now. But I talk about that very openly because so many young kids do follow me on social media, to let them know, okay, I went through this. It was very scary to be in a place where I wanted to end my life, but I got through it because I went to the doctor, I got the help I needed, I talked through it. I know that all this online stuff is just noise. It's not me or whatever. And so I think we have to have these conversations because it could save someone's life.
That's something I thought was wonderful about your campaign and your platform is The vast majority of people who really deeply connect to you, I've found, are young people. And there aren't a lot of people that are older than them that are even talking to them about these issues. So they're struggling with these things, and they're saying, is it just me? And it makes them feel ashamed. And you've made a lot of kids not feel ashamed. And I think that's a really big deal, and I appreciate you for that.
Yes.
And you brought up a topic I was actually about to bring up, which was the connection between the hate that we're seeing towards LGBT people and drag queens and anti-Semitism. There has been such a surge in anti-Semitism across the country, and we know, like locally in our neighborhood, there have been increasing incidents of anti-Semitic graffiti, street harassment, etc. What is the root that is connecting these issues? Because there's clearly overlap. The exact same people are attacking both groups.
Well, it's part of that fear mongering that I talked about earlier. When you have nothing else to run on, you use old tropes, and history so often repeats itself. Most people, not most people, that's not true. There is a large percentage of people who believe the Holocaust didn't actually happen, which is mind-blowing to me, that people would actually believe that. And the Holocaust was not that long ago. Both of my granddads fought in World War II. It was not that long ago. It is not some like ancient history thing. It is something in many people who are still alive. It was in their lifetime. So when we see history repeating itself like this, that's why we really have to take action to stand against it. Especially with our Jewish community. There's only 15 million Jews in the world. That's not a lot. But it is the religious group that is targeted the most. And I think it's intersectional because it's linked to white supremacy, because these are the same people who are going after our Black community and our immigrant communities and our AAPI Asian communities, and it's all fear-based, and I think I almost said a cuss word. I don't want to do that. I think it's cowardly. Yeah, bless you. Yeah, I think it's cowardly, and I think it's disgusting.
Another issue that I don't feel like we're talking about enough is a lot of these white supremacist organizations are targeting at-risk young people and pulling them into the movement. As somebody who works a lot with young people and helps expose young people to new ideas and new ways of thinking, what can we do about the fact that lots of young people, especially young white men, are being radicalized by hate organizations that have anti-Semitism at their root and are also promoting anti-LGBTQ, anti-Black, and anti-immigrant sentiment?
Well, they're going in and they're radicalizing these young people, particularly when you look at it, it's oftentimes young white men from lower income, areas, and they're doing it as a way of saying, oh, look, what is that great analogy of like, okay, when for so long, like straight white men have had like everything, so they're like up here, and then everybody else is like down here. And then when laws get changed or society changes and things start to balance out, this group over here, instead of seeing it as like things are balanced out, they see it like this. So they'll use talking points like, look what they're taking from you. Look what they're doing. Oh, they're taking your job or your money or your whatever, and then saying, and do you know who did it? It's, all these other groups. And so when you're young and impressionable and you see your maybe one of your parents got laid off and you're struggling financially, or you feel whatever, they're preying on that vulnerability to indoctrinate you.
I think that's very true, and especially because the internet, it gives
a lot of
really bad, forces access to young people they wouldn't have had in years past. So it's easy to radicalize people quickly. and that's it's really scary. And I think that another issue is that a lot of people, especially that don't live in large, diverse cities like this, they're not exposed to a lot of different
But
kinds
it's like
of
you said,
people.
it's even happening in our city. I feel like every week we're seeing stories of a swastika being painted on something, which is just like, it's like insane.
One part of it is I know I work in a lot of areas of local politics, and I know that there are groups that do target young New Yorkers that are intentionally radicalizing them and filling them with hate. It's a problem across the country. In terms of identity, we haven't really had a public discussion for very long about transgender and non-binary identities. It's only been in maybe the last 10 years that you've even heard those, most people have even heard those terms. You identify as a non-binary person, so explain what that identity means to you.
I think for everyone, everyone's own unique experience is their own. So anything I say is from like my experience. Everybody is an individual and has their own whatever. But the language is now catching up for sure, like you said. Like this is pretty new language, but the reality is trans people and non-binary people have been a part of society for thousands of years. Indigenous cultures who are indigenous to the Americas had the two-spirit people. You have in Hindu societies, you have multi-genders. In parts of Asia, there's hundreds of genders, and I think a lot of times I can understand why people might be confused by it when you say, oh well, there's a man and a woman. I can certainly understand because when you're born, the doctor says, oh look what's there, that's what this is, So I can certainly understand why people would say, oh, there's only two genders, but you have to look at and again, this is from my perspective, you have to look at the spiritual aspect of it. Whether I'm not a religious person, I'm a spiritual person. I believe we all, again, this is my own thing. I believe everybody has a soul, and I don't know what happens to it when we are not on earth anymore. But I believe we all have a soul, and I think that's like what kind of guides who you are. And so from my experience, when I was a little kid, I don't know if there's any queer people here, but like, when I was a little kid and I was like on the playground, I didn't have the language for it because I was 5, but I knew that I wasn't like the other like boys, right? I just did not relate at all. I just didn't relate. Like I wanted to. I had like my own agenda. I would. My cousin Sophie had this duffel bag when she would come visit, and it was full of like costumes and costume jewelry. And I would make her put on like the ties and the suit jacket, and I would put on the dresses, much to her chagrin. But I was like, no, I'm getting the nice dress. And so even as a kid, I was like that, and I didn't have the language for it. And then when I was a teenager, when I was in high school, and like when you're in high school or middle school and high school, and you're going through a lot of hormonal changes and discovery, the only language I had for it was, oh, I'm gay. And so I came out, and for me, when I came out at 14 or 15, there was still that I was like excited I was like nervous to come out, but I was excited because it was kind of like weight lifted. I didn't have to like lie anymore, right? Like I didn't have to like pretend to like girls, no offense to girls, but like I didn't have to like have a fake girlfriend to like whatever. But there was still this part of me spiritually that didn't feel, there was like still something missing, and I didn't know what it was as a teenager. And as I became like an adult and started evolving as a human being and learning more about myself, and as societal language changed, I'm 35 now, and so when I was probably like 29 or 30, I was like, oh, I think I know what that missing, that like feeling that's been like, that like missing, that puzzle piece that hasn't been put in yet. And I was, I've prayed a lot about it and talked a lot about it in therapy and with my family and friends and myself, and I was like, I don't identify as a woman, so I'm not trans, but I don't identify as a man either. Well, what does that mean?
How did you first find that language?
Well, I mean, our society has shifted a lot, and language around being non-binary or genderqueer or however you identify has been more publicly accessed. But so now when we have people saying, "Oh, that's not real," or refusing to respect someone's pronouns or whatever, that to me is saying you don't validate me as a person. What does what I call myself or how I identify impact your life? How is me just existing impacting your life? I don't care what you do in your life, so why do you care what I do? Why do you care why do you care? Like, who cares?
Apparently a lot of people.
A lot of people do, and it's so crazy to me. Like, I don't care what you call yourself. You could call yourself a potato. If that's what you want to call yourself, I'm going to call you a potato because I respect you as a person. You know what I mean? Like, I don't care. Like,
I think it goes back to what you were talking about earlier, because you were saying, oftentimes when a person is born, they're assigned a gender, but even that isn't as cut and dry as people say. We know, studies show about 1 in 1,000 people is born without a clear gender, and oftentimes gender-affirming surgeries are given to babies and young children who are intersex, and nobody ever talks about it.
And it's so traumatic on that child.
Like, we've decided that some little kids' bodies aren't okay, and we modify them based on social standards.
Mm-hmm.
And we're having this fight, in culture now about what level of access young people choosing their own gender identity and affirming it should have to medical care, without even talking about the fact that parents often make these choices for babies.
But a lot of this is new in the last, several hundred years. Like I said earlier, for millennia, a lot of cultures and religious cultures and societies have had multiple genders within their society, and then you have the kind of Anglican European ideal of what life should be kind of imposed in society. That's a whole nother topic. But you have that kind of imposed over the last several hundred years, and it also for many cultures for years, women were it was matriarchal societies, and now we live in a patriarchal society. So a lot of this is new in humanity, So we just have to kind of unlearn that stuff that has been imposed on us.
So on a larger cultural political level, what are some things that you hope to see over the next couple of years that could increase the level of safety and equality for LGBTQ youth, especially trans kids?
Well, I think it starts with conversations like this, right? Like talking with people and meeting people at their level and hearing where people are at. And sometimes these conversations are uncomfortable, right? Like it can be uncomfortable to talk to people. People are weird.
I'm a delight.
You are a delight. But people are weird, right? So it can be uncomfortable. But if we don't have uncomfortable conversations, we're never going to learn or learn about empathy for other people, right? And so I think it starts with conversations. I think it also starts with calling people out on their BS. And if somebody is saying something racist or misogynistic or anti-Semitic or homophobic or transphobic, it can be scary to call people out, but you gotta call them out or they'll keep doing it. And then of course elections have consequences, so voting is very important. And like I said, I know it seems like New York has an election every 5 minutes and it's exhausting, and I'm like, how many primaries can we have in 1 year? But showing up really is so important, and with our young people, showing up for our young people and telling the stories of history so they know that the Holocaust was real and it did happen so it doesn't get repeated. Talking to young people about what they're going through in their life and sharing that you don't have to hold it inside. If you're having thoughts of suicide or you feel like you're being bullied or whatever, like don't hold that in. So I hope over the next couple of years we get to a place where people allow themselves to be a little more vulnerable, which is hard, but be a little more vulnerable and open to uncomfortable dialogue, because without that uncomfortable dialogue, change can't be made. We'll stay stuck where we are.
I think that's so important, and in terms of the even larger cultural level, obviously the last administration was a disaster for LGBTQ rights, but it was only, it was a disaster, but it was even less of a disaster with the last Republican administration, because traditionally LGBTQ rights have been widely disrespected by both parties. How do you think the Biden administration is doing in its efforts to protect trans and LGBT youth? Are they doing enough? Could they be doing more? What's going on there?
Oh, you can always do more. Always. I mean, the Equality Act has still not been passed into law. And even though we don't have the House right now, we have enough people in the House, but that's a Senate thing. So we have the Senate votes. The Equality Act has to be passed. It is crucial to make sure that people don't lose. In like, I think it's like 28 states, you can be fired for identifying as LGBTQ. And there's nothing you can do. You can't sue. There's nothing you can do about it. Your employer can find out that you're a trans person or a lesbian or a bi person or whatever, and they can just fire you. It doesn't matter. You can have like 20 PhDs, and be great at your job. It doesn't matter. So that's why we need the Equality Act passed, because we need to make sure that we're protecting families. There are so many kids in the foster care system and so many kids who need homes, and there are loving families who want to give these kids a home, but in a lot of states, they're not able to because of the laws against LGBTQ parents. So that's why we need to pass the Equality Act, and I think Biden needs to really stress that. I think within that act and within our federal government, we need to put in protections for trans people and trans-affirming healthcare, so people can have the access to healthcare that they need as a trans person. And then we need to make sure that this administration, they're doing a good job, I think, appointing judges, but they really need to find a way to start holding states accountable for their actions. Like right now in Florida, Ron DeSantis's education department has now banned African American studies in schools, saying that it's not historically accurate or relevant. What? Like, that is mind-boggling to me. And they're not even trying to hide the racism anymore. I don't think they did a very good job of hiding it before, but they're just blatantly not trying to hide that now. So I think the administration needs to really push against that and put educational practices into legislative action federally.
Speaking of people who push these policies forward, are we going to see you on a ballot again?
Not this year. No, I don't know. Are we going to see you on a ballot?
I'm not the one being
I was like, don't come. Listen, you ran too, okay? I don't know. I think I am a big believer, and I hate when people run just for the sake of, like, I hate when people run because they're like, I'm gonna run for office because I deserve this, or I should be this, or whatever. I think
a lot of entitlement around.
There's so much entitlement. I think you should run for office when it is the best opportunity for you to be of the maximum amount of service to the people that you would be representing. And when I ran, I felt that I was able to be of maximum service in the role as a city council member.
How did you choose to run? What was that process like? I've never asked you.
Exhausting. It was exhausting, I've been involved in politics for many, many years, and was doing a lot of advocacy and activism work and working with a lot of different nonprofits around our unhoused LGBTQ community, and just doing a lot of advocacy work. And then when it got to be, a couple years before the election, not a couple years, like maybe like 2 years, I was like, oh, do I want to? Should I look into running for state office or whatever? And then I was like, you know what? I think I'm gonna do it for city council, and I think we can make a lot of change here in our neighborhood, and I did it. And then there's a city council election this year, and a lot of people called me and asked me to run and said, hey, are you gonna run? And in my personal life, I'm getting a divorce right now, which is not very fun, and so I was like, okay, what is my belief system? Only run if you're able to be of maximum service to others. And I don't feel I'm able to be of maximum service on that level while going through something personal like that in my life. And so I was like, so I will continue to do advocacy work and work with the nonprofits I work with. And then if in 2024 or 2026 or whenever, if there happens to be a position that I feel I'm able to serve, I will. If I don't, then I'll support a candidate that I believe in. But I hate when people run for the sake of running. Career runners are...
and you've probably experienced this too, you mentioned at least once. Have you been asked to run for every single seat that comes up? Because ever since I ran, I get asked every time. Do you get asked every time?
I've been asked to run for city council. I've been asked to run for state senate, state assembly, and Congress, and I'm like, next thing you know, maybe I'll run for the White House. No.
It's flattering when people ask, but I appreciate what you said, which is, people shouldn't just run for the sake of running. There needs to be a reason.
There needs to be a reason, and I think also, like, for me personally, again, everything is my own experience. Like, it impacts your every single person who is in your life is impacted by your running for office, and so I take that strongly into consideration. Like, my marriage was greatly impacted by it when I went to the White House and I was getting all those thousands of death threats. The person I'm seeing now, who is not in politics and not in the entertainment industry like I am, and works a cute little corporate job and does not want to deal with any of this, he started receiving death threats because of that. So even not running for office and being someone in the political world, the people in your life are impacted. So, and my granddad was in politics. My granddad was part of the House of Delegates in Maryland and was a judge. And my mom told me when I decided to run for office, she was like, this will impact every facet of your life. So make sure it's what you actually want to, is this what you want to do? Because it will impact every single part of your life. And so I have to not just consider myself, but the people that I care about in making the decision to run.
I know exactly what you mean, because I was, before running, I was a journalist for many years. And when election season would heat up, if people didn't like my coverage, they would just attack me. They'd go after my mom.
Oh, yeah.
They would look up my family members and you'd get death threats, especially when Russia started interfering online. Mm-hmm. So sometimes you would get death threats and you wouldn't know if they were from a real person or from a bot. It's a fun, not so fun house set of mirrors where you don't even know if you're safe. And I know you've experienced this.
No, after the White House, I had a police cruiser outside of my apartment for 2 weeks. It was not very fun. It's not fun to be the target of people wanting to kill you. But we got through it. And
yes.
Hopefully,
I
don't get. Yeah.
So I would love to open it up to questions. I don't know who's handling the microphone. Is that my friend Terrence back here?
Hello. Yes, that's
wonderful. Me. Okay, so raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question, and Terrence will bring a mic. Oh, we have some right here.
So, I can ask you questions all day long, but I won't. I'll keep it to two. My first one is, you spoke earlier about going back to the old tropes we normally use to talk about. Do you think it's not? Do you think it's more fear of the unknown? Meaning things like the kid you met who came to his parents saying, "I never met somebody who was of the LGBT community." You think she said it's easier if you're of the unknown?
I think it's twofold. I think fear of the unknown, sure, which is why we have to have the uncomfortable conversations that I talked about, so people do learn about other people in the world. But I also think it's old talking points in the sense of, like, we as a society have moved forward so much in progress for marginalized peoples that when you then go back to talking points from 40, 50, 60, 70 years ago, and then you're bringing them back into the forefront now. I think they're reverting back to old talking points to fuel people's fear of the unknown. So I think it's a kind of twofold situation.
And then you spoke about, walking through the UN, in full drag, next to ambassadors who were killed for doing so. But I'm curious, you spoke about, even when you were at the White House, that you didn't feel like you could have gone to the White House in drag. So I guess, at what point would you feel that, like how long do you think it would take to get to a point where you could perform at the White House in drag?
Oh, I would love to perform at the White House
So
in
my question
drag.
is, how far away from that point do you think society is?
Well, okay. So I was invited to the White House, but there was a drag artist from DC who did perform for Obama when he was in office. So it has been done. I would like to be the second to perform at the White House. I wonder what number. I would probably do like a Bette Midler number.
You're going to invite me, right?
Yes, of course. I would do a Bette Midler number, or Shirley Bassey number. She's my favorite singer. But yeah, I think it depends on the administration, honestly, of if how close we are to that. I think with this administration, we're certainly closer than the last one. I think it just depends on the administration.
We got someone back here.
Yes. All right.
You're getting a mic.
I was just wondering, what do you think it really is that frightens people about homosexuality?
Oh, I don't know. I think it's great. I think it's that thing we were just talking about: fear of the unknown, fear of people who aren't like you. I think homophobia and racism and anti-Semitism and I think they're all kind of intersectionally linked. I think when you don't if you haven't interacted with someone who's different from you, it can be difficult to humanize them. It's very hard, as hate-riddled as some people can be, it's very difficult. And we see people saying awful things to people's faces at these protests and stuff. But if you have a one-on-one with someone, not at a protest of a drag story hour, not at a protest of whatever, but if you have if it's just two people sitting down, it is very difficult on a human level for you to look someone in the eye and say, I hate you because of who you are. It's very difficult. I don't think people are programmed to be bad people. We learn to be bad people. We are taught hate. And you can also unlearn that behavior. So I think when you've never had an interaction on that kind of level, it's very easy to be like, yeah, I hate you because you're gay. I think that's an abomination. But if you have a one-on-one sit down with someone, and of course we can't get everybody to have one-on-one sit downs, but when you humanize, it's very hard to hate when you humanize something. So I think it's just lack of education and lack of interaction. But statistically, every single person probably has a loved one who identifies as LGBTQ. So just talk to that family member.
And I think on learning hate, I know I grew up in a far-right, white nationalist religious environment, actually, that I got out of. And a lot of the hatred that was specifically targeted at gay men was because it challenged the role of gender, because a lot of places have very traditional ideas about the role of men and women. So homosexuality was a challenge to that norm, and it impacted everything from the way kids are raised to who goes to work. So it was, really a form of misogyny. It was saying men are supposed to do X, Y, and Z, and if you're deviating from that, you're a threat to the way I want the world to work.
Well, it's so interesting. We as a society think it's weird when a man cries, or when a man shows emotion. Like there was this thing, I can't remember who it was, that some celebrity like posted a picture of them with their son, and they were like hugging their son and like embracing, a beautiful thing, like a father hugging his son. And people like tore it to shreds, like that's not normal. Why is his mom not the one hugging him? Shouldn't a dad show love towards their child? Shouldn't a dad show affection and care towards their child? What is wrong with that? But we as a society have put so much weight on like, a man has to like, you know? It's just like, yeah, it's violence.
We have another question right here.
When I was growing up, the term was drag queen, and I'm not sure how that evolved. Is that derogatory, or is now used drag artist or performer?
I think, so I call myself, for my profession, I call myself a drag queen, but there's drag kings who are you know, where I like wear big wigs and, you know, feminine makeup. Like a drag king would be someone who does the masculine side of that, right? So I kind of generalize it when talking outside of my own personal experience and myself. I generalize it and say drag artist. And then if that person says, oh, I'm a drag king or I'm a drag queen or whatever, I just generalize as a drag artist, and you know, to not offend anyone.
And explain the difference for folks who might not know between the art of drag and cross-dressing and gender identity.
Oh, they're all different. So drag for me, even though I identify as non-binary, drag for me is my job. It's an unusual job to have. I love it. But for me, it's my, you know, I studied musical. I came to New York when I was 17 to study musical theater, and I love singing and acting and dancing and making little TV shows and doing all that stuff. But drag is a way for me to do that in a different way. You know, like I talked about earlier, where I can like, you know, one day I can